open.
It read, Memorandum to disband X Task Force, Alpha Team. Webster growled. Barnes was far off in the darkness, his heels clacking upon beat-up tiles as he paced in circles. This was because Webster wouldn't agree to activate X. He was sure of that. Barnes now appeared in the light, far across the chamber. Their shared floor consisted of rows and rows of old steel desks. For all their rows, they could be a maze. Somewhere in the darkness, from time to time, Webster would find the coffee room, the showers. His appetites never rose to the point of needing either. He did have a memory from many years ago of enjoying a hot cup of coffee. The last half-dozen cups since hadn't been nearly as good. He had hoped many times he might find food in the coffee room. He was never hungry, he had no memories of ever eating, but his awareness held so many beautiful examples of everything delicious. One day, he'd like to experience these things, of which he was aware. Barnes and Webster each worked under a single orb of light, set high above them in whatever counted as the hardened counterpart to the floor below. From his desk, off in the distance, Webster could see the fleck which was Barnes, toiling about. When that fleck disappeared into the darkness, when the clackety-clack of his shoes echoed, that's when Webster knew there would be trouble. Once, they had activated X, after years of Barnes pleading, never with any evidence, cause, or reason. Finally, one day, Barnes had worn him down. They activated it, and nothing happened. Webster had refused to do so again ever since. But what harm could it cause? Barnes had asked. Who knows? It could cause all kinds of harm, Webster had replied. It didn't last time. It didn't seem to do anything, so why use it at all? We must use it. It is what dampens the chaos. It's what keeps the firmament strong. It's why we exist, and you know it. We are the keepers of the world. We maintain the firmament. Room seems just fine to me. For now. So you say. But can you show me any charts, data, to prove there's a danger? Can you show me what X might have done last time? You know I can't. Why I say, let's try it again. Maybe write more policies, file more memos ahead of time. There might be an effect if there's more regulation. Or maybe things might go bad. I say, the world is fine. Let's not rock the boat. Barnes had stormed off. They repeated the argument at least once a year. It was only years later that Barnes grew very insistent. What's changed, Director? Webster had asked. How can you say that? He had screamed in reply. How can you dare say that? What gall! What irresponsibility! When we stand at the gates of a great unraveling, we could lose everything. All of it. Our one task. This whole world. Gone. Becoming just like the chaos outside. What's changed? Nothing. Except now is the time. I'm sure of it. A few days later, and now this memo lay in Webster's inbox. A memo to shut down Alpha Team. That meant him. He wants my key, Webster muttered to himself. Procuring a dusty binder from a randomly placed library shelf, Webster hefted it onto a desk nearby. The cover was stamped with the seals of 5 agencies, with 7 more listed. The regulations listed inside didn't appear to belong to any one of them. Webster checked the table of contents, then the index. He found the page, flipped to it, ran his finger down while hunched over the table. "Damn you, Barnes," he muttered. Barnes was within rights. The director couldn't fire Webster, but he could disband his team. The director couldn't remove Webster's authority over X, but he could temporarily requisition Alpha Team's entire inventory. There was no quartermaster on file, so Barnes would be authorized to take possession himself. It was a gray area, but possession is 9/10 of the law. If he got his hands on Webster's key, he'd try to use it. There was no reason to think X knew which hand was turning it. Webster had never fully explained to Barnes why he was so reluctant to activate the box again. He felt as if there was a part of himself which had gone missing, and that part might understand the reluctance. It wasn't the sort of thought Webster was normally comfortable entertaining, but somewhere else in his intuition, something barked at him. Barnes wanted to push the button because he believed the world was at stake. Webster wanted to avoid it for the same reason. Webster's gut told him that if X was activated again, it would be the end of the world. The chief formulated a plan. He knew Barnes well. Odd that two of them were here, the world's pillars, and they were so different. Maybe that's what made it work. Webster spent an afternoon moving desks, forming a maze of sorts. The screeching noise of their feet scratching the hard floor must have got to Barnes. Webster saw the distant Fleck pacing. The next day, Barnes had come with another memo. Webster caught its title. A demerit. Webster hadn't yet processed the Alpha Team disbandment memo, let alone filed or executed it. This new letter was the first formal reprimand. Hell, if Barnes kept at it, he could place Webster into administrative leave status. That would obviously do the trick and get him the key. Director. Webster put forward a hand, blocking him from dropping the paper into his inbox. Barnes practically leapt in place when he saw Webster stretch out his palm. "What do you mean, he shouted. "Sorry, sir. You didn't read my memo?" "What memo?" "I filed it in your monthly box." "I check that monthly." "I know. On the second day of the administrative month." "Today is the first day." "Isn't that just frustrating? See, my new filing procedure is active from the first of the month." "You have to give notice before implementing a new procedure." "I did, yesterday, to your monthly box. Today, the memorandum comes into effect. Curse this bureaucracy. Am I right? You wouldn't have checked until tomorrow. These rules create such waste sometimes, I think." Barnes pushed to his limit, waving the demerit memo, spitting, "So, where do you want this?" Webster leaned to the left and gestured to a far table at the entrance to the new maze of desks he had created, at the edge of the rim of light. "Over there is the walk-in notice box. You may place it there." "And when will you read it?" "It's explained in the procedure binder, summarized in the memorandum I sent, sir." Barnes stormed off, taking 5 minutes to wind through the maze. He slammed his memo on the desk above the label Webster had left. Thus, the Great War had begun. Each day, Webster would increase the size of his maze. Processes, co-filing forms, requests to produce requiring co-filing forms, review periods, even unambiguous loopholes arising from poorly worded sentences were invoked to make it increasingly impossible for Barnes to ever get a single letter in front of Webster at his desk. Barnes filed a memo invoking a regulation about safe working conditions out in the darkened areas. Webster filed a request for lamps. Barnes, miraculously, produced pallets of them. The contest continued for months. Barnes, early on, had forced Webster to accede to an off-the-record, clandestine line of communication. A red phone. Webster panicked the day when Barnes had stomped through the maze, bypassing all the filing station, and dropped the phone right on his desk. Webster began to protest, but Barnes verbally invoked the pertinent regulation. Webster spent 2 days tearing through various rulebooks, searching for whatever loophole Barnes might be planning to use with this phone. Meanwhile, Barnes made an aggressive push to get through the maze. After 2 days, Webster had concluded that there was no loophole. The phone would be safe to use. Barnes called him as soon as Webster had returned from developing his maze. "Good. I'm glad you answered," Barnes said. "I think it's important we have an emergency channel. We're responsible for a mission after all." "You knew there wasn't a loophole, didn't you?" Webster asked. "I don't know what you mean." "You waited 2 days to call, even though you could have the second you put the phone down on my desk." "No, I was busy until now." "So what do you want?" "I've found some food, if you'd like to share a meal. Regulations do not forbid the director from fraternization with the tactical team's chief. That's all." Webster hesitated. "Thanks for the offer, Director. I'm busy too. Can't take you up on it today." There was no rule saying he had to say yes, not anywhere. Oh, but Webster imagined what sort of food the director might have got his hands on. He lusted for it. This must therefore be a trap. For 2 years the dance continued. They were the most exciting of Webster's life. He began to believe he could continue like this forever. Yet, that part of him which made him to do this, the fire that burned against X, the missing piece, a silent voice, that will, it was also desperate to eat food. It was desperate for countless more, things known but forgotten. But food was high on its list. Barnes was smart about this ploy. He wouldn't mention his offer of a meal too often. Webster knew that, were Barnes to persist, his own defensive barriers would come up, and temptation would never breach them. Barnes was clever enough, and patient enough, to only plant seeds. Only 4 days after a new phone call, another invitation, did Webster find himself caught in a mania. He scoured the rule books. Barnes himself had been building up personal regulations to preempt and counter Webster's effort. The chief took time to understand them better. He lost progress in his race against Barnes, but he didn't want to get trapped during their meal by some verbal process. After so many months, Webster concluded that there was a way to safely share a meal with Barnes. Webster could declare a certain kind of emergency, a contingent operation. Webster could become king of the castle for a few hours. The risks of declaring such an emergency were simple and few. There was a time limit. Webster's scope of action was limited, but certainly didn't preclude Barnes from voluntarily joining him with victuals in tow. Barnes could drum up Himalayan stacks of paperwork in the aftermath, which would force Webster to lose substantial progress, but the meal would be safe while it was being consumed. So be it. He called Barnes with the suggestion, without any dissimulation. Would the director join the meal under an emergency declaration? He was eager to. Webster had set up a lamp in the dark no-man's land between their respective territories. It was the last stretch of area still in the darkness, outside of the mazes. Barnes had, of course, built a maze of his own as well. Barnes came with an umbrella and a solar tether flare. It would be an indoor cookout. He had a cooler and a grill. An air filter, too, for the smoke. "Hamburgers," he said. "I even found ketchup and relish. American cheese. No beer, but I've drawn from my secret stash of Diet Coke if you want. Director's prerogative." Webster smiled kindly. "I prefer coffee anyway." Dropping some of his gear, the director said, "Come on then, help me set up." Only a few words were exchanged over lunch. Webster had known what a hamburger would taste like, yet the feeling of eating one exceeded all his expectations. Once he was finished, fat and happy, he asked, "So, you've been eating these for years?" "Me?" he replied. "No, I've been waiting for you to accept my invitation. Otherwise, I might have eaten them all before we had a chance to share." They both laughed out loud. Webster wondered what Barnes's agenda had been. There didn't seem to be a trap. Only now did he realize that Barnes probably only wanted to talk, to take a break from their contest. "So, you want to talk about X, I bet," he said. "Just talk," was the director's reply. Webster didn't know why he was giving in so easily. It was an unspoken rule, maybe. Professional reciprocity. "My view hasn't changed," Webster declared. "I've noticed." "So what do we have to talk about?" The director folded his hands, lowering his head in humility. "I haven't been fair," he said, "to your concerns. Your point of view. I admit it's self-serving to ask, but I would hear your point of view, if you care to give it. I mean, what you really feel." Webster shrugged, explaining, "I couldn't explain it well if I tried. You might have guessed that I think X is the problem, not the solution." Barnes nodded his head, his mouth forming a range of emotions, before admitting, "I'm not as dumb as I look, Chief." Webster said nothing. "I know how things seem," Barnes continued. "The world. I've asked the same questions I know you have asked. How did it get here? What's outside of it? Who made us? Why? For instance, have you ever wondered why we have team regulations?" "I never thought about it," Webster admitted. "We don't have any teams. Of course, there's yours. You are a team, of one. But filling our world are stacks and stacks of binders describing any number of team rules and regulations, roles and positions. To be fair, my original explanation for this, after it began to bother me, was that this simply described the potential of our world. Maybe someday, for reasons we can't understand, there will be more of us. The world could grow. You never know. I thought that for a long time. Then I realized it could go the other way too. Maybe there had been more of us. Maybe there could still be more. But maybe in the past there had been more of us." "What happened to them?" Webster asked. "X. A revelatory chill, lightning paradoxically striking during a blizzard, shot through Webster's body. He immediately knew it was true. "I'm right, then. X is dangerous," he said. Barnes shrugged. "Dangerous? At least you're right that it might have a reductive quality. I keep thinking how nothing happened last time we used it. I spent years investigating the data for signs. Then it occurred to me that our own data, our own memories, would be subject to X. We might not remember what it was like before." "How can you justify its use then?" "One thing I know," Barnes winked. "X will not destroy the world. It's incapable of that. It only targets chaos, and it's chaos that's destructive. We never know when that 1 in 100 million chance will hit, where the electric forces of the universe will tear into our world, pierce our firmament, tear through the ceiling or floor, and destroy both of us. We are playing dice with reality. Every day we delay. Every day the storm builds." Webster considered Barnes's explanation. His heart bore the weight of a suddenly realized tragedy, but his mind was very calm. Just now, it realized that it was already aware of all of this information. "What is the source of this chaos, Director? Everything in our world is perfectly ordered. Both of us live our lives perfectly within the rules." Barnes raised 2 eyebrows. "You're right that our world is well ordered, and that's why it's protected. Chaos shouldn't be able to touch us. And I can only speak for myself, but there's no chaos in my heart. Ask yourself, is there any in yours?" Webster had already swallowed his last bite before Barnes had finished speaking. Now that he was done, there was no need to answer Barnes's question. Their parley ended, and Webster returned to his desk, furiously preparing the memos he needed to deal with the onslaught Barnes would throw at him in the coming hours. For 3 weeks, Webster raced to finish the after-action reports and subsequent filing actions for the little emergency condition that had shielded their lunch. He had no time to consider what Barnes had told him. Then, after another week, catching up with Barnes's progress in his maze, safe again, Webster realized another seed had been planted. Barnes was right. Not everything in Webster's heart was well ordered. He did have a missing piece, that part of himself which told him of unseen things which were true. That part which told him not to activate X. Since he knew these things but couldn't explain them, it was as if this part of himself wasn't fully there with him. It was as if it resided beyond, outside of the dome that encircled their floor and ceiling. Didn't Barnes have his doubts? No, Webster thought. He didn't. Not like Webster. Webster had questions. Logical questions that revealed uncomfortable facts which nevertheless validated in every dark but true way Barnes's obsessive shared purpose with X. No wonder Barnes had panicked many years before, having been so certain about an intrusion of chaos into their world. It was within himself, Webster knew, that this chaos existed. It took a single form, a reluctance to use X, and it was the existence of this reluctance that convinced Barnes X was needed. A neat paradox and perfect target for X. The world X created existed because Barnes had willed it. Anything standing in the way of that will was the chaos opposing its order. What was it about Webster that allowed him to come along so far with Barnes, all the way until it was he alone who stood in opposition to him? Webster grew forlorn realizing this. He ceased typing the current draft of his next rulebook. He rested his chin in his hands, watching Barnes in his daily gallop through the outer reaches of the maze, briefcase in hand. Webster realized that he wasn't protecting the world anymore. He was protecting himself. What was left of the world didn't need him anymore. Moments later, the chief entered into a frenzy. He stacked desk upon desk into a pile, gathering them with screeching ferocity, building an ever larger base for them to rise upon. Hours became days as he sweat, straining muscles while hefting the heavy steel blocks one on top of the other. A pyramid began to form. Barnes had taken notice and interest, enough to stop his progress through the maze. Never mind that Webster was sacrificing the maze to find construction materials for his tower. Barnes had his moment now, if he wanted it. He surely had more than one manila folders in his case, with memos prepared for immediate filing that would seize the key to X at a moment's notice, if ever the maze should fail. Yet Webster had the key in his pocket, and here he was higher and higher in his tower of desks. How would Barnes get it? Oh, the minute Webster returned to Earth, he might face a sealed and filed court-martial. What of it? Would Barnes fight him for the key? Perish the thought. Webster laughed, thinking that the only reason he was still here is because he wasn't the sort to fight against regulations. Regardless, Barnes would at least have to wait until he came down. 3 days it took to reach the ceiling, the casing of their firmament, the inner surface of the great dome. Barnes never tried to intercept him, to serve him papers. In fact, Webster had lost sight of Barnes. Here he was, in any event, at the top. He was higher than the hanging orb, the light which hung so high above his desk. He saw for the first time that the ceiling was made of hexagonal panels. He hefted one more desk up, leaving just enough room to squat under the ceiling. Then, with all the might of his thighs, he braced. In moments, the panel lifted, and he slid it aside. Outside was nothing. Darkness, everlasting. Only electrified chaos bounded off the dome. The world, a sphere of panels, keeping chaos at bay. Snaking rivulets of electricity slid past Webster, barely missing him. Much less than 1 in 100 million odds now, Barnes. he whispered. Out in the darkness, Webster searched for something. He had hoped it would be that missing part of himself. In his despair, Webster let his unconscious mind calculate the risk-reward intersection of his despondence, his remaining hope versus the chance of being struck by lightning. He couldn't remain out here too long, but he wouldn't go back down just yet. An invisible and imperfect timer ticked down. Then a voice called, "Get down from there, idiot!" It belonged to Barnes. Webster peeked under the rim of the dome, noticing that just a few feet below his level, 100 yards off, was a hanging catwalk. "You want things to go badly for both of us? Give that lightning a chance to strike through the dome. Come on, enough." The timer suddenly hit 0, as if the hole in an hourglass had instantly widened and all the sand fell through at once. Webster ducked down, pulling, setting the panel back in its place. He pounded the corners so it sat evenly. Then he came down, all the way back to his desk. Barnes gave him 3 days of mourning before he returned. He walked straight up to Webster at his desk. "I noticed you've updated your filing system, made it more efficient. Thank you for placing the notice in my monthly and also my critical inboxes," he said. "Just a courtesy," Webster admitted. "Sadly, I didn't have time to read the full rule book, just the summary. I have a memo for you. Where should I put it?" "You can just hand it to me, Director. It's appropriate during call-in hours." "Which are now?" "As of now, they're every hour of every day." "All right. Then, here you go. See you soon." Barnes let a paper float down onto Webster's desk, and he turned back toward his side of the world. Webster read the memo. It was an equipment request for borrowing, completely at Webster's discretion. 1 key, X activation. Webster considered it. Barnes had chosen the respectful approach. An hour later, after a last coffee, Webster walked over to Barnes's desk. The box sat upon it, X to Barnes's right. "I've approved your request, Director. Would you like a copy of the memo?" he asked. "In this case, we can overlook it," Barnes replied. Webster nodded. He handed forward his key with a meek smile. Barnes seized it. Webster slowly walked back into the darkness. He could just see Barnes pulling his own key out of his pocket. Webster saw the box's yellow light quietly illuminate. Then Barnes turned the 2 keys.
Is glued